Hi, Sanjib.
Hey, Alfredo, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, it's been too long.
I know. I'm here with Arturo, my
Yeah.
co-founder.
Hello, Sanjib. How are you?
Hi,
Nice to meet
hi,
you.
hi, Arturo. Nice to meet you.
We'll do a quick intro before we start the actual video. As I mentioned to you, Arturo and I started a startup recently on digital marketing and are
Hmm.
conducting this series of interviews with startup people, founders, entrepreneurs, and we thought it would be a great idea to have you
Yeah,
join us. So we're pleased to have you.
that sounds great. And I must let me just start off. I was taken aback by the virtual backgrounds because it looked the same. So I was like, oh, you guys are in the same place. And then I was like, oh wait.
we try to make some pre-production arrangements.
Yes. No, it looks good.
So let's start with you introducing yourself. Why don't you take us a little bit about your journey and your background?
Sure,
Very
absolutely. And thank you, Alfredo, for letting me be part of this. It's been great, to be friends through the years, and and now being in the entrepreneurial world, really happy to share what I've learned. Just a little bit about myself. I started off on the technical side. I used to be a chip designer at Intel, then went to business school, after which worked at Citibank for many years. And then the last 10 years, I've been an entrepreneur, working in startups, now working on building my fourth startup over the last 10 years. The prior two startups, well, actually, the first startup was an ed tech startup. The second startup was a payments technology startup that was acquired by Google. And the third startup was a FinTech events business called Money2020, which was also acquired. And now I'm building my latest startup called Guppy, which is democratizing data and credit data more specifically. Because if you think about credit bureaus and credit data that's out there, if we have consumers have limited access to it, limited control over it. And in fact, if we want to see our data more than once a year, we're often charged to see our own data. Meanwhile, that data is being sold for a lot of money, and once again, we have little control over it. So what we are doing with Guppy is building a platform where data can reside, and it's built on blockchain technology. And with blockchain technology, you can push control to the edges without sacrificing security. And so that enables consumers and actually even account providers like banks to control and monetize their data in a much greater manner than anyone ever thought possible.
So clearly, you are a veteran in the startup world. Can you share with us a little bit what drove you to solve this problem? How was that thinking process to solve this problem for people and get access to the data?
Sure, absolutely. So, Guppy has both B2B elements as well as B2C elements, and I've actually personally felt the pain points on both. When I was at Citi, for example, there used to be constant goal of getting a better view of our customers, and that was to prevent bad customer experiences, to enable us to deliver the right product at the right time, and to make smarter risk and credit decisions. And inevitably, there were issues with the data, and so it was like I said, pretty consistent problem pain point I felt on the B2B side. Then on the B2C side, actually, in April of 2012, I was, it was a very busy month. April 1st, I got engaged. April 2nd, Google acquired the startup I was working on. April 13th, I was buying an apartment in Manhattan.
Okay.
And April 29th, I was getting married because my mom had some health issues, so we wanted to get everything done very quickly. So it was a crazy. And because I was buying the apartment, they pulled my credit report. And according to the credit report, I was married to a man in California. I had 5 foreclosures and 4 bad auto loans, all of which was wrong data. And I was nearly unable to buy my apartment. Luckily, I had an easy conversation with my wife, like, hey, honey, I'm this is bad data. We can proceed. But it was a very painful process, and then actually, fast forward a few years when I was working on Money 2020, and I was helping pick speakers and put together the agenda on Bitcoin and then blockchain, and realized that technology could actually be quite transformative in this space and help make things better. I think like when you are building something new, it's sort of a bit of stages. So first of all, you use any prior experience that you might have, but then do a lot of reading, because even though I was in uh, Citibank in the credit card business,
Mhm.
there's still a lot more to know about credit bureaus and credit data, and so just did my homework there, and then networked with people, and just started asking them very open-ended questions about what sort of pain points and how did they do things, and then that helps you form you, and also talk at a high level about what you're thinking, and then once you get a better idea formed in your mind, then you can have more conversations where you're leading. Okay, this is what I'm thinking. These are the various functions and product features, and so it is an evolution as far as like how I went about building it.
Thank you very much. And when you look back in time, what you wish you knew back then that you know now,
Yeah,
what would be a piece of advice reflecting in hindsight?
yeah. I know that's a very interesting question, because everybody has their own journey, but for me, actually, I feel that the first startup I worked on was a bit of unlearning what I'd learned in the corporate world, in the sense that there's in sort of large organizations, things are much more regimented and hierarchical, and you have a you typically have lot more limitations in terms of what you're able to actually make happen.
Mhm.
Um, but the flip side is that little bit that you can make happen will likely be in the hands of millions of customers, or potentially millions of thousands of millions of customers. On the flip side, as an entrepreneur, uh, you have much broader control over what happens, and much broader impact on decisions. But the flip side is that you're not going to have at least initially, not going to have the impact on thousands or millions of customers. So it's sort of that's a bit of the trade-off, and and so from that, you're able to I don't know. I guess it's the first startup was I mean such a great learning experience, and I wish that I was probably a little bit more bolder as far as like realizing what I could change, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of I'm trying to fit this into the box of the industry.
Sanjib,
Got it.
how are you? This is Arturo.
Hi,
Great to meet
Arturo.
you.
Great to meet you too.
I was, it's a great story what you're telling us about your different entrepreneurial endeavors. In these three companies that you built, did you have like a co-founder? Because you mentioned you had like a technical background.
Yeah,
Did you have
yeah.
a
So
co-founder?
yeah, no, I mean, to be clear, like the first startup was with actually with one of my best friends. We were actually roommates in college, and we actually have known each other since we were toddlers. So we've known each other forever, and so he asked me to join him on as he was building this business, and then The second business was actually, the CEO was also a friend who I've known, who had by that point had known about 10 years, and he was a serial entrepreneur, and this was his latest thing, and so he asked me to join him on that. And then the third startups, similarly, it's sort of personal relationships, and now with this latest startup, I've asked basically some smart friends of mine who we have sort of a like-minded mentality about building business and what's important to us in our lives. And so it's actually very important that you find people that you can work with that are similar enough but different enough, and similar enough in the sense that bring similar values, similar enough in the sense of dedication, similar enough in the sense of uh, being able to think on your feet and sort of be flexible, because that's really important with a founding team and with a small, as you're building a startup. And on the different side, it's actually very important that you have people that also look at things in a different manner than you might, because then you can question each other, and you have very heated debates. And in the early days, and actually throughout, it gets very very, very emotional, and
Also, right?
yeah, it's quite right, and but and you have to have trust in those people too. So I guess it's to be honest, it's very hard to find. And so when you find someone that you are that's on that good wavelength, you try to make the most of it.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. I think that's very important, partnering with the people who kind of share your values, learn from each other, and have those dialogues and discussions to move towards a common goal. That's great. So what's the next milestone for Guppy?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we have our next milestone, and it's probably everybody has had a bit of a crazy year this year. So
Right.
so I think looking out towards next year, I think we're at a point where we can start really engaging with the market, because I'd sort of describe us as still a little bit, under the radar. We're not necessarily, we've built quite a bit, but it's very much in private mode right now. And so next year, hope to be able to go more public with what we're doing. Hopefully announce some interesting partnerships in some markets that we're going to be starting to go into next year, and growing the team, and so like I'd say that at this point, I think we've built a good engine, and now next year is going to be building the car around it.
That's great. So, and we keep an eye on your progress. Definitely, we'll follow that closely.
No, thank you.
In terms of customer acquisition strategies, reflecting your journey in multiple startups and even Money 2020, what kind of hacks you can share for successful customer acquisition strategies?
Yeah, no, I think a couple of thoughts come to mind. I guess first is differentiation, and you want to be differentiated to the point you might even feel a bit uncomfortable, pushing the bounds a little bit, and this is probably going to be really controversial, but or maybe not. But if I feel that, and what I've learned is that if you're angry, if you're pissing some people off, then you're probably doing something right. Because if you're not, then it's probably going to be a little bit a plain and not differentiated, and it's going to have a harder time breaking out. So I think that's one piece. The other piece, like for example, specifically with even with like Money 2020, email was a big channel for us,
Uh-huh.
and my goal with our emails wasn't to get an open, wasn't to get a click. My goal with emails was to develop an email that was so good that people would print it out and hang it in their wall. Um, and that's sort of the goal. And in order, and then you think about like what's required in order to go through all those steps. You want to have something that, engages the mind, does so in a different way, and something that has a persistence or value over time. And so I think to the extent you can raise the bar on your creative, I think that definitely helps.
That's great. That's very helpful. And in terms of, in particular, organic customer acquisition, what are your thoughts in terms of social media, SEO, in particular?
Yeah. I think that's also an area that is tremendous opportunity if you do it right. Um, the Once again going back to Money 2020, we used to and like a lot of conferences, they will,
Right.
if you're a speaker at a conference, they'll give you some kind of a speaker gift, and what we did with our speaker gifts, we did a couple of things. First of all, we made them personalized. So when you are accepted as a speaker at Money 2020, Money 2020 show, uh, we make a caricature of your image. And we put that caricature on whatever speaker gift that we had, be it a coffee mug, be it we made Lego figures. We made toasters that toasted your image onto a piece of toast. We made socks. We made things that were different, and then we also shipped it to the speakers in advance and asked them to they usually they saw what we sent them and they're like, oh, this is so cool. Then they would share it on social, and then that was sort of a, a way to build organic voice in the market. And it really helped us in the sense of helping get views in a different manner than one expects. So for example, and I think maybe not to jump. Well, I started off at Intel as a chip designer, as I mentioned, and Intel was a computer chip manufacturer, but then they started to market in consumer, direct to consumer, which they didn't really need to, because like companies like Compaq, Hewlett Packard, so forth were using their chips in their computers, but Intel went direct to consumer, and it was it was in a place that that was not necessarily expected, and so by being in unexpected places, that's also another way to break through the clutter.
So you mentioned that in your current startup, you're still like in a private mode, and you were mentioning that you have like two sides, like the B2B and the B2B side. So have you given a thought on, for example, I think on the B2B you were talking about some partnerships as kind of your next milestones. On the B2C side, what's kind of what do you think is going to be your main customer acquisition strategy there to kind of expand?
Yeah, and I think part of that depends. It'll depend on which partner we end up going to market with, and so for example, what we're building, just at a very high level, can be used in an emerging market as well as a like say for example even the United States, and so depending on the market, there could be so in markets where there might not be as many financial services, the way that to enter that market wouldn't necessarily be through a financial company, but might be through some other partners there, like in on the e-commerce side potentially, or digital side. Whereas something in the U.S. where there's still I guess very significant penetration of financial services and banking accounts, that then we could potentially leverage something like that for as far as a go-to-market strategy.
Okay. Now, switching gears to your style, in terms of your mindset, when you build a business, do you focus on every single step, or you are very open to explore where things might take you?
Yeah, I think it's I tend to be on one hand I tend to be very OCD about certain things. So for example, like this even goes back to like as a chip designer, like you want to maximize the efficiency of your manufacturing. You want to get as many transistors onto a piece of silicon, and you're just like super focused on that. So like, for example, even when I'm loading the dishwasher at my house, like I'm like, okay, how do I fit as many dishes into this dishwasher as possible? And that's sort of like my mindset. So I can get very caught up about certain things, but at the same time, being able to go with the flow, if you will, because it's impossible to know where things are going to wind up. Like, so for example, I started, thinking about Guppy, several years ago. And the world is very different now than it was then. And the idea has morphed over time. It's evolved over time. And so on one hand, the vision is fairly consistent, but then on the other hand, a lot of the trappings around it have changed, and what's important might have changed, and even how I might talk about some of the value proposition has changed because, for example, consumer privacy is a much bigger deal now than it was back then. Then even looking at the economic cycle and people needing to rebuild credits and so forth. That's also something that I'll have to incorporate next year.
Excellent. How do you stay productive during the day? Like, are you a morning person, a night owl?
Yeah, I would say I used to be a night owl, and I've become more of a morning person. And there's also what I found is that different times of the day I'm good at different things. Like actually during the business day, I'm typically not very creative. It's more about like moving things or sort of more process kind of stuff. Whereas in the morning, when I'm getting ready, I could be creative, or in the evening, when I'll go for a walk, or I'll just relax a bit. That then that also can get the creative juices going. So you also this is just something I've learned about myself. So that's another thing. Like if you're aware of when you're good at things, you can try to plan around that too.
Excellent. And obviously, reality now is very different. We are remote for the most part. There's not many conferences or travel at the moment. But usually, do you prefer the office setting? Are you flexible as far as remote working? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I so in normal times, because I'm actually still working on Money 2020. I'm building Guppy, and I've got a fairly full schedule. So I actually wind up traveling in normal times, probably more than I'd like. So actually, I like working from home, but I also definitely miss being in an office at times. I definitely miss at conferences. That's just such a great way to catch up with a lot of people very quickly. So it's I, I I've been working from home, for most of my time for about 4 or 5 years now. I definitely like it, and the other thing with entrepreneurship is that as an entrepreneur, I feel like you can pretty much work anywhere, which is great. But then you sort of have to be able to work all the time, and which is the flip side. But for me, I actually I like that trade off.
No, and I think when the job becomes so entertaining that you don't feel that, that's great.
Yeah.
How do you avoid burnout? You know,
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I try to do is to try to stay healthy, and which is hard, especially when you're on the road. It's really hard to be healthy because you're eating what you can, and you're usually running from here to there. But to the extent that you can try to get in a walk or workout, try to eat healthy when you can. That little bit helps, and I actually, like, I find that when I don't, I feel worse, and that's sort of like the carrot and the stick. That's a stick to say, hey, eat the carrot.
Mhm. So and one thing that I think it's prevalent on successful entrepreneurs is probably having like a neat circle of mentors or people that you can talk to, because even if you have your co-founders, you're still kind of working 24/7 and you need some outside perspective. Have you developed like this network of mentors over time, and you use them frequently?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely having I don't necessarily know, in some cases I think of them as mentors, but more often than not, it's sort of a network of peers that
Mhm.
you can share with, because building and this is actually another learning, when I left and to join the corporate world for the startup world, is that the entrepreneurial world it can be very lonely. It's really hard. It's amazingly challenging, and so more often than not, when you meet with another entrepreneur, they're not thinking about stealing your idea. They're not thinking about, how do I use this to my advantage. It's like, more often than like, oh, I feel it. I can feel your pain, and it's just being able to talk about that is actually, very important. Uh, and more often than not, it's like, even with mentors or peers, it's like, just having them say, you're not crazy. This is actually, this is how it is, and just figure out how to manage it, and I think just that little bit of reassurance is actually very important, because,
Yeah.
like I said, it's a very psychologically challenging road to walk down.
excellent. Um, what's been your biggest setback as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'd probably say that, the first startup, we never, we had a great, well, the first startup was a company called Ironsoft, and we were bringing online classes onto socially networked apps for tablets and for mobile phones. And this was back in 2009, 2010, 2011. And so, this was back in the early days of the app world. And we actually we built the first official Khan Academy mobile app. We built apps for MIT, for Cornell. Fast Company listed us as one of the 10 most innovative companies in education, even though we were only literally 2 people at the time. we won a Kauffman Foundation fellowship. So had a great product, a lot of notoriety, and like I said, this was working with one of my best friends, and then getting to the realization that, at least for me, that this wasn't working, and then having to make that hard decision it was actually very, very difficult, and I think the good side, it was like we're still best of friends, but it was definitely a challenging time, and when you each put in your heart and soul into building something, and it doesn't necessarily work out the way that you had envisioned, uh, that too can also take quite a toll, and it's just sort of being able to bounce back from that and rebuild whatever you can was, I think, quite a challenge for me.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. I mean, this is a great conversation. We are enjoying your insights, Sanjib, and we share a lot of the perspective you're sharing with us. More on the personal side, any favorite book or movie that you've been reading or have seen recently that you recommend?
Yeah, so this is I'm not totally up to the latest on, but I finally got a chance to see. I don't know if you saw the movie Ford versus Ferrari.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I saw it this past weekend, and totally loved it. And someone had been recommending that I see it for a long time, and I finally saw it, and I loved it. It was just like, that too is actually very much the entrepreneur's journey, and Carroll Shelby, and what he was able to do, and then dealing with some of the sort of the corporate politics at Ford, and as well as Fiat, actually. That there was a lot to digest there, but it was I, I would definitely recommend that if you haven't seen it.
Excellent. And those are all the questions from my side. I don't know if Arturo has another question.
No, okay. Sanjib, thank you very much. Really appreciate the time that you've given us to talk, and I think it's been super insightful for us.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Thank you, Alfredo, and thank you for letting me be part of this.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Take care.
Here. Bye-bye.